This is Tammy Champa, the superintendent for Owatonna Public Schools. This is a voiceover for the Levy presentation that has been presented throughout our community. We certainly realize not everyone has been able to attend an in-person event, and so wanted to make sure that the information was provided to those of you who'd like to just listen to a recording before the upcoming vote next week. So really, liking to start with talking about what does make Owatonna a special place to be. And so being new in the community and in this role here in Owatonna, there are just a couple of things that for me have stood out in Owatonna. And just a few of those areas are career pathways. There are districts across our state that are really working diligently to put in pathways programs. However, what you see often are districts really looking for the recipe of how to do this work. And I just really applaud Owatonna in the way that they approach this. It really was more about what resources do we have here in Owatonna and how do we build around those partnerships and grow a pathway program that really exemplifies the work here in Owatonna. And that has been done. And the number of partnerships here in Owatonna, I think, just speaks volumes to this community in general. Secondly, Owatonna Online. And so I would argue there are a few programs in the state that have online programs that are truly quality programs. And regardless of how people really feel about an online program, I am proud of the work that has been done here in Owatonna. Not only do we provide a quality program for students who make that choice, but also a partnership that is very unique to Owatonna, which allows students who may join us from a district in another area where they can retain their school experience, whether it's arts, athletics, and get their education here from us. And those are partnership agreements that are throughout the state. We currently have about 400 students in our online program. So very proud of the work that's been done there. And then the teacher apprenticeship program. So I often talk about when I was first looking at teacher opportunities, it would be very common to receive 400 to 500 applicants for one position. And that is no longer the case today, specifically in hard to find areas. And Owatonna has been very proactive in this area as well, with writing grants and really starting apprenticeship programs that afford our own staff the opportunity who may be serving in a paraprofessional role or an education assistant role, that they are able to continue to work while they're gaining that credential. In music, fine arts, and extracurriculars here in Owatonna, there are just so many opportunities for our students, and there is a strong history in all of these areas. Facilities and all the work that has been done and the investments here in Owatonna, certainly proud of the facilities here and our new literacy curriculum. These are just a few things that I think really allow Owatonna to stand out amongst other public schools in our state. One of the things as we were welcoming our new teachers to Owatonna and the back to school events this fall, there really was a theme. And we heard that theme repeatedly about why people were interested in joining our school district. And it was because of the kind, welcoming community, the dedication of the staff, the strong sense of community and teamwork, and just a strong community offering a warm and welcoming environment. And that just really resonated as we listened to some of those same thoughts from our new staff. Last spring, the school board really wanted to engage with the community and understand what might be there for support for an operating levy. And so they partnered with Morris Leatherman, a community that offers surveying, and these are some of the results that they found. 92% of those surveyed gave a positive job performance rating to our Owatonna public school teachers. 88% of the respondents believe that the quality of education in Owatonna public schools is excellent or good. 88% believe that the school district provides a good value for their investment. And then when they were asked what are the top 3 areas that they appreciate most, they said our Owatonna teachers, the variety of programs, and community involvement. And having experienced the homecoming parade for the first time here in Owatonna, wow, community involvement speaks loud and clear here for sure. So as we move forward, Owatonna is also in an area of experiencing financial challenges. Like many districts across our state and nation, we are at a time where there are a number of challenges. And so specifically on this slide, I have a picture of the new high school. And I think for a number of reasons. So I know when the high school was built, there were some comments and conversations about they'll build it and not be able to afford to operate it. And this is called an operating referendum. So certainly understand how that can be a little bit confusing. However, the new high school operates slightly less with utilities than the previous high school did. And so it is not about operating the high school. Rather, it's about operating the district in total. So we would be standing before you, or in this case, speaking before you, regardless if the high school was there or not. One of the areas that we also like to speak to is Owatonna Public Schools is the third largest employer here in Owatonna. So not only are we providing the education for our community and our students, but also a major employer in our community. And we take great pride in those who come back to us. So we have about 40% of our staff have gone through our system, graduated here, and are now a member of our staff. So last spring, the school board also unanimously approved holding a referendum this fall, asking our voters to approve an increase in the operating levy of $700 per student. If approved, this levy would generate approximately $3.7 million in revenue per year for the next 10 years. So understanding school taxes. Often we have bonds and we have levies. And so the difference between them, which can get a little confusing, we like to think about bonds are for building. So in 2019, there was a building bond request in this community, and levies are for learning. And the big area that is really the difference in how taxes are assessed in both of these are when there's a bond, all land is taxed. And so specifically for our ag owners, it's all land is taxed. When it's a levy for learning, that looks different. And so in that case, when it's a levy, it's the house, garage, and 1 acre. And so a difference in how taxes are assessed. So importance of levy funding. So right now, if we look at how our schools are funded, or schools across our state funding accounts for 79% of the dollars that come into Owatonna Public Schools. 12%, a very important 12%, comes from local property taxes. Other, such as grants, donations, and ticket sales, make up 5%. And finally, the smallest bucket is federal funding, which brings in 4% of our funding, specifically title funding and special education. So why now? So the last time there was a levy increase was in 2013. Now, that can also be confusing. So when you think back, some of you are experiencing this firsthand. In 2019 was the building bond request for the high school. And then in 2020, there were 2 questions asked of our community. Question 1 was to maintain the operating levy at the rate of $556 per student. Question 2 was for an increase. During that time, question 1 passed to continue. Question 2 did not. So the last time there's been an increase was in 2013. State funding has not kept pace with inflation, and we'll look at that in a future slide. And then we'll also talk about a few of the examples of federal and state mandates. And then we'll also look at, we like to compare in the Big 9, whether it's athletics or what it might be. So we'll also look at how we compare with levy funding with the Big 9. And also, it's just important to note that districts really have just a couple of ways to change our budget. One is to make reductions. Another is to ask for support, or a combination of those things. And also, I'll add grant funding as well. So we are busy writing grants as well. A couple of things with that is they're always competitive and they're temporary. And so while we do take every advantage that we possibly can in that area, there's no guarantees. So this looks at state funding versus inflation. And so as you look at the red dotted line, that's where our funding currently is. So if you look towards the end on the right-hand side there, $7,481 per student is what we call our general ed revenue. And if the state had kept up with inflation, that dollar amount would be $8,951. That inflation gap represents $7.3 million per year that Owatonna would have been receiving if there would have been an inflationary adjustment. Now, luckily, the last, what we would call a funding legislative session, there was an inflation adjustment. And so this year is the first year, fiscal year 26, where the formula was adjusted by an inflationary index, which was 2.74%, which allows for that $7,481 per student. And next year, we're expecting that is going to be right around the 3%. It cannot be less than 2% with the current language that's in place, and it can't be over 3%. So we talk a lot about unfunded mandates, but what does that really mean? So this is just here to give you an idea of a few examples in this area. So one is in the area of special education. So our federal government has committed to funding special education at 40%, and the state of Minnesota has committed to continuing to work to close that gap. We are not there yet, and so currently in Owatonna, $2.4 million is the additional dollars that are needed in order to fully fund special education. The next one looks at special ed transportation law. So brand new in the legislative session in 2025, special education transportation was reimbursed at 100%. That was changed in this last session to move to 95% reimbursement. And for Owatonna schools, that means $200,000. In our next fiscal year, that will change to 90%. So we'll see this number continue to increase. REDAC curriculum and training. Well, we are grateful for all of the work, specifically to our teachers who have been working diligently in this area. We're grateful for it. However, it comes at a cost as well for materials and training, and just gratitude to our staff as well. Summer unemployment staff time. So in this last legislative session, a rail project was canceled in the amount of $77 million, which allowed for summer unemployment to be funded last summer and again in summer of 26. But in addition to that funding, we also have staff time and certainly uncertainty moving forward in that area. New in January of 26, we will have paid family medical leave. And as an employer, employers are required to pay for at least 50% of that tax, which is 0.44%. And then earned safe and sick time is relatively new as well. And then there are a lot of small things like requirements in our programming, requirements in plans that must be in place, and a number of those other areas as well. But this gives an example of a number of these mandates. Next, we look at the Big Nine Conference. This specifically only looks at levy funding. So when we look at the Big Nine, we can see where Owatonna is with an operating levy of $556 per student. And we see Austin at $513, the smallest in the Big Nine. And then as we continue to move to the left, we have Northfield with an operating levy of $2,184. In the state of Minnesota, there is a cap. So the state recognizes that there is a need or ability to go to our local taxpayers and ask for additional support, but they cap that out. And so Northfield is at that cap. So the next question might be, well, where would it put us if this levy is successful? This slide looks at exactly that. So we would be at $1,256 per student. And you can see that would put us fourth in the Big Nine, very close to Winona at the $1,228 per student. This next slide looks at general fund revenue. So we've been looking at the basic formula in the earlier slides. Then in the state of Minnesota, school funding is incredibly complicated. So there are a number of categorical areas that school districts may be eligible for. So there might be transportation sparsity, there might be declining enrollment. There's just a lot of categorical areas that schools are eligible for. So what this slide does is it looks at our general fund revenue per pupil. So we have the big 9. When you look at now, all of those areas, including levy, that make up the per pupil revenue. So you're looking at the big 9 districts in blue, you're looking at the metro, southern metro districts in orange, the state average is there in purple, and we have Owatonna in green. So when we look at all the districts across the state, there are 331 districts in the state, and Owatonna, if we had them all lined up, would be 196 in per pupil revenue. So shared approach, it's very important that we are good stewards of taxpayer dollars. That is our responsibility. And so it's a constant balance of how do we provide the very best for our students while being as efficient as we possibly can. So regardless of when we're asking for support, we're always tasked with looking for those continued efficiencies. So this current year, the district prior to this year did reduce in the neighborhood of about $1.8 million. And then there's also deficit spending from both last year and this year. And similar to your own savings account, that can only continue so long before there have to be a number of adjustments. So right away, you might think, darn it, manage those dollars better. And in reality, Owatonna really has a strong history of excellence in financial reporting. In fact, they've received that recognition for the past 32 years. So the Owatonna budget, when we look at the entire budget, we're just over $80 million. And it comes as no surprise, we are in the people business. So salaries and benefits accounts for 81% of our budget. And then when you continue to look at additional expenditures, the next area is purchase services, which largely is transportation. So by not owning our buses, we contract with Owatonna Bus Company, and that is the majority of our purchase services. And then we have supplies and materials, capital expenditures, and other. Now, when we look at where do those dollars go, we're very proud of the fact that 75% of those dollars go directly to the classroom, whether that might be a special education classroom, regular instruction, vocational ed, pupil support, what that looks like. So a little over 75% does go directly to the classroom. Next, we look at property tax impact. So this slide just looks at a variety of home values and what the dollar amount would be per month. Online, we have a tax impact calculator that we encourage and invite you to put in your own value for your home to see exactly what that impact might be. So levy approval, if passed, what will that generate for our district? Well, earlier we talked about the dollar amount that would be generated, but this isn't to add anything. It is to maintain what has been built here in our school district. And I have a colleague that said it well. Levies used to be the icing on the cake. In fact, levies were called excess levies because they were the extra, but today it really is the cake. It is maintaining the work that has, again, been developed and built here in Owatonna. So what happens if the levy doesn't pass? Well, we talked about earlier, 81% of our budget is people, salaries and benefits, and we know that we are in the people business, so adjustments are going to be made. They will impact programming and people, and those exact determinations have not been made at this point. So it will be over $3 million. The board will take an active role in that as well as those adjustments are made. It may be in class size increases, some of the services that we provide or programming, academics, activities, athletics, fine arts. All of those decisions will be determined as we continue to move forward. This slide looks at the official ballot, and a couple of things to point out on this ballot. This is for 10 years. That's been mentioned a couple of times. And then I also want to point out that it is subject to an annual increase at the rate of inflation. So what does that look like? It looks at the CPI standard, would be the inflation. We would have no control over exactly what that looks like, but just really wanted to note that it is attached to that inflation adjustment. And then also it is dependent on the next net tax capacity of our community. So if the net tax capacity increases, the dollar amount would decrease. And I also want to point out that the $700 per pupil unit, so if our enrollment goes down, then our dollar amount coming in would go down because it is based on the per pupil. So where and when do I vote? Early voting has been open since September 19th, and the precincts will be open on November 4th from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. If you are within Owatonna, it is at your regular polling place. Outside of Owatonna, it is at Clinton Falls. And if you're unsure, on our website, we also have Find Your Polling Place available for you there as well. So with that, I appreciate being able to present the information, and up until the day of the vote, or even on the day, if there are additional questions that I or our finance director can provide additional answers for, what we're really wanting to do is ensure that all of our residents have had the opportunity to hear factual information and they feel informed when they cast their ballot. So with that, thank you and have a great day.